Hello, this is Michael Hexter, and welcome to episode 11 of my video cast here on YouTube, Politics 2100. So, episode 11 is called Neoliberalism, the Hollowing Out of Civil Society and Climate Chaos. And I'm trying to draw a line through those three different things, and I will try to do that in this episode. So, neoliberalism is a very important concept. I will put a link in the description box of a piece by George Monbiot, the journalist, the British journalist, which is a good summary of the problems of neoliberalism, and I will quickly sketch out a definition of neoliberalism. There are a few of them out there, and also a little bit of its history, and then go into the other two items that I was describing, and why it's such a devastating. It has had such a devastating impact on our response to global warming. So. Neoliberalism has been the dominant ideology for the last 45 years, the ideology of governing in large portions of the developed world and some of the developing world as well. It's a response to the earlier dominant ideologies, which were a form of, you'd call it military Keynesianism, and you'd call it either state socialism, state capitalism, command economy in the Soviet bloc and in China. So neoliberalism was an effort to overthrow Keynesianism and also to do the same with state communism or state capitalism in the Soviet bloc and other countries. So neoliberalism is a reviving of a laissez-faire economics, or a form of laissez-faire economics, which was an older governing ideology before the 1930s, before the first the collapse of capitalism in the late 1920s and early 30s. And so neoliberalism is about idealizes markets and idealizes the private sector as the ideal form of human interaction and human existence. And the idea is to replace government action or direct government action to do various tasks in society with market mechanisms, either conducted in the private sector or the government indirectly through the private sector doing the same tasks, or supposedly better, more efficiently, however it's being described by the propagandist of neoliberalism. Anyway, that replacement of the state doing things directly in the society as a whole was supposedly more freeing, more efficient, better in some way. And so famous leaders that are associated with neoliberalism are Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, and then also the left-wing versions of neoliberalism, which Bill Clinton, Tony Blair, and then Barack Obama are all political leaders. And also Augusto Pinochet in Chile was also an early neoliberal, at least in his economic policy. And also Jimmy Carter actually started economic neoliberalism here in the United States. And so it's a process of deregulation of industry, cutting taxes on corporations and on the wealthy. The idea of trickle-down economics is part or one aspect of neoliberalism, and so what's happened in the last 40 years is that wealth inequality has soared. We have now, well, before maybe there were 1 or 2 billionaires in the world. There are now hundreds of billionaires in the world, and centi-billionaires. There are a few of them as well. And so these project and by other measures, wealth inequality has soared, and also there's increases in poverty in some areas of the world, and also in some of the developed countries. There have been certain winners in the neoliberal era, certain, like for instance, in certain classes within China and also India. Some other countries have their welfare has, or their wealth, their monetary wealth, and also by some measures their overall social welfare has increased. But this is often at the expense of the working people in the core capitalist countries of Europe and the United States. And so overall, this has been and politicians. So what's happened in political life and is that politicians defer more and more to this private sector, either knowledge or also actually individuals from the private sector. You have politicians that are directly, they're CEOs of a company and then they become a politician. Beyond Donald Trump is only one of the latest, but Mitt Romney, Rick Scott in Florida, Berlusconi in Italy. You have a bunch of people transitioning from their private sector life to the public sector, as if their knowledge from the private sector will translate directly into the public sector. And so one of the critical, Margaret Thatcher once said that there is no society, there is just families and individuals. And this is the credo of neoliberalism, that in some sense society as a collective entity doesn't exist, that you act as an individual consumer or as a family consuming on markets, and that is your main role in society. And so, and to be fair, there are aspects for people who, certain groups in not only China and India, but also in the developed world, the middle class, upper middle class, educated people have seen certain aspects of their life improved by having access to a wider variety of goods, having a wider variety of employment opportunities and even business opportunities within a certain, I wouldn't say bubble, or with certain sectors, with certain higher, where people basically are able to purchase and they have enough money to buy goods, and the goods sometimes are often cheaper sometimes than they were, partly because they were built under conditions that are below the standard of the people consuming it. In other words, they're often in countries, rapidly developing countries like China or Vietnam or India, Indonesia. So you have this broad variety of goods. So for consumers, it's been a relative paradise. Okay, for those who have income to consume or to buy things, and so there not only is there widening wealth inequality, but there's also inequality of advantage and experience of things getting better. Okay, but anyway, that dictum that Thatcher said that there's no society, they're just families and individuals, and also the idea that markets are going to lead us to success as a society overall, has meant that this is where in my observation, there's been a hollowing out of the idea of civil society, that civil society is a vague concept, but it means sort of that there's a sphere of public, there's a sphere that's like a public sphere where people act according to some civic duties, that they don't just act according to their pure self-interest. They have a self-interest, they don't necessarily contradict their self-interest, but they also are trying to serve a role that has a broader social mission, and including, it could be private entities, it could be non-profit entities, it could be government, and it could be individuals who are part of this civil society. So, so bringing it to climate, okay, and why this has been absolutely devastating for our response to our fossil fuel addiction and the resulting global warming, so and climate chaos. So I think I mentioned this in a couple of videos, or at least one video before. The first, so in 1988, which is already into the neoliberal era, the world suddenly discovers that we have anthropogenic global warming. In other words, that our human activity is changing the climate. There were reports earlier, there were reports from newspapers, there are speculations from newspapers from 1910 about, or some that if we burn too much coal, we might change the climate. So it wasn't, it was something that some people were aware of, or it might be a possibility, but we have then in 1988, James Hansen testifying in Congress on a very hot day in the summer about global warming. And this started, or that among other things, started a chain of government leaders deciding that something needs to be done about global warming, that something was happening with the climate. And you have scientists who are with government agencies like NASA, where James Hansen was, that are observing this, and they have the measurements to show the climate warming. And so this is late in the Reagan administration, and then you had George Bush as well thereafter, the first George Bush, and then Bill Clinton here in the United States. Anyway, so at that time, the idea, the dominant economic model and social model was neoliberal, and also neoclassical, based on neoclassical economics, which is an older, invented in the late 19th century, taught as mainstream economics for at least a century, or at least dominant within the economics profession, but a very abstract and unrealistic model of how the economy actually works, unfortunately. And so neoliberalism draws from neoclassical economics. So the ideas that were proposed as the solution to global warming were all about creating, tweaking markets to recognize that carbon has a price. Okay, so it's called carbon pricing, is the sort of the idea, and there are two different types of carbon pricing, or generally two different types. One of them is cap and trade, okay, or emissions permit trading, and the other is a carbon tax. And so either one they were debated, and even among those two, a carbon tax would probably have been more effective, but they chose the cap and trade mechanism because it is actually more neoliberal, okay, more market focused. It creates a market for these trading permits, and the market is regulated by a cap that is lowered periodically, so that the polluters, who are the companies that are within the under the cap, or within the trading system of, they say, if they need to buy a permit to pollute. So if the price of the permit goes up because there's less of them, they pay more. So they're eventually become incentivized, according to this theory, to reduce their own emissions. So because it becomes more and more expensive for them, slowly over time, incrementally. And so the idea was that somehow innovation would occur that would reduce emissions at power plants, at factories, wherever government, entities. Though for a government entity, it's not going to be so, it's not going to work so well, especially one that issues its own currency. So, but anyway, so this whole system was based on economic speculations by people who had unrealistic ideas about economies, and also weren't really focused on the main drivers of global warming, which are transportation, energy, and also agriculture, land use change. They weren't based on what would be the realistic changes that given the technologies that were available. And to be fair, in the 90s there was still technologies were still evolving or still becoming cheaper, that would eventually be some of the main instruments which we would use, like solar panels and wind turbines and so forth and so on. They have had a development, some of it due to government policies that are not cap and trade, like a feed-in tariff, which was done very successfully in Germany and in Italy and some other countries. So the prices of renewable energy plummeted, so that it now is some of the cheapest electrical energy that you can find, having nothing to do with cap and trade. Or very, very little. But anyway, this whole system, basically the question of whether a government leader, getting back to politics, was serious about climate was in the 90s and the 2000s, and even into the 2010, considered to be whether or not you would join Kyoto, whether the United States, which didn't fully join Kyoto and didn't sign the treaties, or didn't enter the emissions trading system as a whole, because of resistance by Republicans, among other people. So that was a false solution, because the world, there's a whole bunch of ways in which emissions leak through the system, and it's patently, and to get into, this is a video not about cap and trade, but it is a system that has, from observation and reality, been a delay tactic. And it was pretty obvious from the beginning that it would be a delay tactic, that basically in my view, and this is maybe an intuition I have, but I think it's a realistic intuition, that the cutting emissions requires a sense of civic duty. In other words, a sense of, or human duty to other human beings, and including duty by corporate. Duty can be a feeling that you have internally, or it can be enforced by a government saying you have to do this as a legal obligation. So and so that cap and trade is an elaborate circumvention or way around the idea that people need to have a duty to to do right by other people. Okay, and so neoliberalism thinks, well, you can trade and barter and everything is transactional. So your only duty is to your transaction partner, and if you guys collaborate in a way where both of you profit or one of you it's okay, and so it doesn't really matter. And so that transactional morality is typical of neoliberalism, but it doesn't get at the fundamental issue, which is that we gain a lot of benefit in terms of that, beside the global warming, beside the pollution, beside both the dirtiness of fossil fuels and the literal physical dirtiness, the local pollution of fossil fuels, and then the global pollution part of fossil fuels. So there's two, but if you take those out of the equation for a moment, because that's the way we've lived, unfortunately, or at least certainly the global pollution part, but we gain lots of, the people who are transacting, in other words, when you go to the gas station, you smell the fumes of the gasoline and whatever, it smells bad, but then when it goes into your tank, you drive and you get the energy part, which is what you want, and you feel, oh, I have the freedom to drive around at whatever 70 miles an hour, or I can drive 500 miles, 400 miles on a tank, and I'm free to do that, and whatever. And so and the oil company says, yeah, you bought it from us and we made X profit on it, and that's so we're both of us are happy, and I'm happy, okay, but anyway, the externalities, which is the effort to put a price on that and say, well, no, you should pay a little more for that. I mean, that there is I think a carbon tax is part of a whole slew of policies that we need to do in a Green New Deal, or climate mobilization, as you might call it, and it's not a bad idea to have that what they call price signal in our daily life, so we know that we are polluting through the pain of paying more money for that product. So, but the idea that alone will solve the problem is wrong. Okay, so there are huge, basically public investments that need to happen to avoid climate chaos. We need to build our energy system to use renewable energy. We need to, and it requires lots of investments that do not have a payout anytime soon, so a private company would do it. They need to be done as public investments, as public goods. And so the framework of neoliberalism that suggests everybody can be incentivized to do all, society is a big private sector, and that basically government is just tweaking little incentives so people do the right thing. That doesn't lead to the organized system of energy that for instance, a supergrid, a renewable energy supergrid is an important part of a climate solution. So there's a very specific technology. Now, I think theoretically someone in the 90s could have thought of that and said, well, we will need a vast upgrade in our electricity transmission infrastructure, and could have started with a technologically based, or at least partially technologically based program to cut our emissions and deal with global warming. But the abstract ideas of economics were preferred because of neoliberalism. So I've had many interactions with people I've been advocating for about 7 or 8 years for this kind of government program, and you need to be able to advocate for it, and also to be able to be an activist for this kind of a program. You need to believe that there's something called civic duty, that you have a civic duty, and also government has a duty to protect us from the consequences of our fossil fuel use. And so to protect humanity, and to protect also the people of the country, of any given country. And so, but unfortunately, because climate activism has grown up in the neoliberal era, it's very hard for people. I'm a little bit older than the typical climate activist, and so I remember maybe an era where there was more civic duty. I'm not saying it was very luxuriant and healthy when I was growing up, but whether it's my age or whether it's just an idea that I have and I understand history and I think better than, or at least more realistically. There's a lot of climate activism that's focused on either appealing to companies to say that you companies should have corporate responsibility and you did the wrong thing, and some of that becomes the basis for a lawsuit. And sometimes it's good to sue some of these companies like ExxonMobil for their for illegal activities or for their reckless endangerment of other people. Okay, but that's not the end game. Is to get the government to act, to pass laws, okay, and to invest, and that requires us as citizens of a whole bunch of countries to pressure government and to say they have a duty, we have a duty to act, and press them to do their duty. And so the neoliberal era has said, well, no, it will all be played out by transactions and tweaking the private sector, and that's had many subtle effects, including among climate activists, so that this sector of people, like I'm a member of Climate Mobilization, or I don't know if my membership is active, but and I contribute to Sunrise Movement, which is, I guess, one of the pressure groups that's doing what I think people should be doing, but I think there should be more, and including older people. Sunrise Movement biases toward the younger people, but older people should be doing. We have more of a responsibility in a way to do stuff in this area. So anyway, it's been baffling to me that people cannot conceive of this relationship of in a civil society of demands made on government to enact laws that regulate, invest, prosecute where necessary, and it's been, I think people have accommodated themselves to this neoliberal idea that politicians really are just transactors. They're not authorities that temporarily democratically elected authorities that have duties, and so anyway, my hair's on fire and will continue to be on fire about this, because it's not that hard to understand, and there are areas where civic activism and civil activism happens, but around trivial things, sometimes, but not around the most important challenge we have. Okay, so like for instance, people go out and lobby for or against, like for instance locally, about zoning and about they don't want this apartment built near them, which I oppose that idea, that NIMBYism or whatever. So there are people who it's actually, I don't think of it as a civic duty. I don't think they have a great idea. They're self-interested actors. But you have people who are on a very micro level doing this kind of thing. So, but on the biggest issue, the biggest, most important issue that we will face as a species, as a people, we need to develop a sense of civic duty and create activism that is about pressuring both the people we sort of agree with and then the people we disagree with, okay, exposing them for their disregard for our welfare and the welfare of young people. So anyway, so that's, I think I've gone on long enough for this video. I will probably return to this. But anyway, I just wanted to talk about this. I know there are reasons why I timed this one made it episode 11, and there'll be other episodes that build on these ideas or some version of them. So anyway, I look forward to hearing any comments you have about the thoughts I've shared with you here, and also please like the video if you liked it, and please subscribe if you think this is a interesting channel for you, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.